You are a generator, here to respond and know thyself. Your not self theme is a theme of frustration. Your signature goal is the sense of satisfaction, having spent a day doing work that you love. You are one of 37% of the population, and you have a defined sacral with no connection between the motor centers and the throat. So I am so excited to dive into the generator type because this type is a very interesting type. And when we think about getting to know the sacral center and getting to know the generator type, we have to first understand the sacral. And there are 9 gates coming off of the sacral center. And when we look at those gates, we first think about the fact that a generator has a defined sacral. So they're going to have at least one channel from that sacral center to another center. And so when we look at those gates, right, we've got gate 5, which is one of the sets of the gates that are connected to the identity center. You've got gate 5, which is all about creating patterns or rhythms for the flow of energy. You've got gate 14, which is about generating energy for the creation of resources, particularly for other people. You've got gate 29, which is really about perseverance and surrendering and saying yes. You've got gate 34, which is your energy empowers others into action. And it's just like a very powerful energy. And then you've got gate 59, which is connected to the solar plexus. This energy is here to create and bond with people or in business. And then you've got gates connected to the root center, and these are format energy. So if these are active in your chart, they're going to influence not just the action, but the whole chart, right? And so gate 9 is the energy to focus and concentrate. And then remember this, it's important to know that all gates and channels hold duality or dichotomy. So the opposite might be true. And many people with this gate or this whole channel may be diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. While I am not a medical expert and this is not medical advice, it is a very common thing that I see when looking at human design charts. And then we have gate 3. This is a very mutative energy to start something new and bring order to something arising, to bring something into form. And then we've got gate 42. This is the energy of entering into cycles and needing to finish them. So completing what has been started. These are people who may struggle to get into action. But once they're in action, they bring these cycles to fruition. And then we have gate 27 and gate 34. These are connected to the spleen. So this energy is strong, tribal, protective, and very nourishing. Think of it as a caregiver. And then you've got gate 34. These are people who use their energy to empower their survival. And then, of course, you've got the gates connected to the throat. We already talked about 34, but 34 is connected to the identity center and the throat and the spleen. And so this is all, again, energy to empower your voice. And depending upon what gate or channel you have activated in your sacral, there will be another audio specifically about that. But I want to mention that here because that is going to flavor the sacral energy that you have as a generator. Okay. And so when we come to getting to know the generator, it's important to understand what they're here to generate, right? It's important to hear and understand what they're here to do. And so there are 2 types of generators. There's the pure generator, which has an undefined solar plexus, and they will have sacral authority. So if you have an audio on your feed about sacral authority, you're a pure generator. If you have an audio on emotional authority, you are a emotional generator. And those are the 2 types. And so when we think about this, one of the things that's important to note when we think about generators is that generator charts can vary very widely. And I think a lot of times all of the generators kind of get grouped together. Oh, they're a generator, they're fine, they can do. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that. And I don't like that because for a couple of reasons. One, I've seen generator charts with 2 centers defined and 7 undefined centers. And I've seen generator charts with 8 of the 9 centers defined. And the way that those 2 people present is wildly differently. And I've seen every other combination in between. So it's important to note that just like every other type, just because someone's a generator, you can't presume they're going to have boundless amounts of energy. A generator with only 2 centers defined, yes, they have the sacral energy, but the reality is they also have a lot of fluidity. And so understanding that nuance becomes really important. So let's dive into sort of the generator strategy, right? So they're here to respond. They're here to be in that sacral response. And the sacral response is not a verbal one. The sacral response is a body pull. It's a right? It comes from the body. My youngest son is a generator. And if I watch him, I can literally look at his answer via his body before a single sound has come out of his mouth. And the reality is sacral response is almost its own language, and it happens in response. Everyone thinks it happens in response to a person, and it does, but it can also happen in response to pretty much anything in their environment. Okay. And that's really important to note. So if you see a bird going past and it lights up your sacral, that is a being in response. Okay. So it's important to note that generators do really well with yes, no questions. Open-ended questions will be something that is a real challenge for generators. And so because that sacral response, it operates in the now, it operates in the moment. It's here to be put on demand. Do you want to go to dinner? Right? And so when we think about that sacral response, it's a full body push or pull. I always joke that whenever I'm on a big group call, you can tell the sacral beings in the room because when something resonates with them, they move closer to the screen or they move further away from the screen, depending upon if it resonates or not. And that is exactly how that sacral response works. There's a push and a pull to it. And so, and it's not if it's like, that's like, I don't know, ask me again in a different way or ask me again later, right? Or if it's like, and the reality is that for many adults, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, they're not really tuned into their sacral response. And it's often because their well-meaning parents and teachers said to them at a very young age, like, you need to use your voice. Right? But sacrals aren't here to use their voice. The sacral response comes from the diaphragm. It comes from within. And so that's just important to note. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So the next piece of the generator strategy is here to really know thyself, right? They're here to dig deep and to get to know themselves. And the generator aura is sort of this very enveloping aura. It's almost like getting a hug, right? It kind of like wraps its arms around you and envelops you. And then it pulls whatever's in its sphere kind of into itself, right? And it knows thyself, right? And it gets to know thyself under thyself. And so they're here to be people who really like dig deep into who they are, right? And to know themselves really, really well. And they're here to just like double down, right? Double down on something that they love. And that's really, they're here to do work that they love. And they're here to go to bed exhausted from a day well spent, right? And it's important to note that the thing that's really important for generators is that they get recognition from projectors, and they need that projector recognition in order to actually be able to like have that sacral response of like, yes, right? So when a projector recognizes them, they can have that sacral response of like, oh, yes, I'm doing the right thing, or, oh no, this is not the right thing for me. And one thing that is important to note for generators is they are here to focus on a single task, very different from their manifesting generator counterparts. They're here to focus on one thing. They're methodical, right? They don't do well switching gears between things, right? They just want to focus on one thing. So when you force a generator kind of out of their little generator zone of genius, they're like, what is happening? I can't like they'll struggle to switch from thing to thing to thing. And they're really here to become a master of the work that they love, right? They're really here to be that niched expert in a particular area of expertise and go really deep. They're here to like be the master. They're here to be the expert, you know? And so when we think about this, I like to call this the response and recognition dance. Because the generator has sort of an open aura, generators need to feel a sense of recognition from the other types. This recognition allows them to get to know themselves more deeply. Okay. And that is so important. So if a generator doesn't feel that recognition, they're going to be frustrated. They're gonna be like, no one appreciates me, right? How often do we hear that, right? And so when we think about this, that becomes so important for that generator relationship and that sense of connection and that sense of recognition for them to know themselves really well. Generators are deeply relational people. Generators need others in order to better see themselves. You need other people in order to see yourself better, to understand yourself better, to dig deeper into who you are. So if you're around people who are not recognizing you, you're absolutely going to be in the not self. You're going to be in that sense of frustration, right? And your aura is open and inviting. It's like a big hug, right? So the reality is when you are present with others, and you have people who recognize you, you're going to want to keep coming back to those people, right? And that understanding that you have and that knowing yourself, it really comes from within, right? And so in order for you to get to know who you are, you have to always be in response, right? And so once you get to know the root of who you are, you will exude confidence, right? And it's this dance of response and then recognition, response and then recognition, response and then recognition, right? And it's this dance that goes back and forth and ebbs and flows, and it's beautiful, right? And passion will just exude from you when you are clear on yourself. And then you just dig deeper, right? I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. I'm going to go, and then I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, particularly when you're doing work that you love, right? Particularly when you're in that space. And so when we think about the not self and the general, the reality is many writers are not operating in response. They're initiating, right? They're like, they've been initiating their whole lives and they're blind to see that they're initiating, and they're often left in this giant place of frustration. And they're afraid that if they let go of moving first, nothing is going to happen for them, right? They are afraid that good stuff isn't going to happen. They won't be able to operate in this world if they don't live in that initiation. And so frustration is often incredibly abundant when a generator like you is in that not self, right? And it's often because one, they're not doing work that they love, or they're not honoring that sacral response, and they fall into being like sort of a slave, air quotes, to others when they fail to honor their strategy and authority, right? They just end up working for somebody else, doing somebody else's bidding. And they end up in this place of like, I'm not doing anything that I love, right? And then, of course, they can be in this deeply conditioned space because of their openness, right? Because like I said, generator charts vary wildly. So they're either deeply conditioned because of their openness, or they're deeply rigid because of their definition. And there's usually not an in-between. And definition for a generator like you is a big impact on generator alignment, especially when there is a split to the throat. And we'll talk about that more on the rest of the podcast. But understand that if as a generator, your definition doesn't allow you to connect to your throat, you may be in the not self. Just something to know. So definition plays a big impact. And it's something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. People don't really talk about definition a lot, but I think it's something that is like so important to understand. That nuance is part of our chart, right? So then when we're in that not self as a generator, you also have this sense of frustration. And frustration comes because you're overwhelmed. You have too many choices. Frustration comes because you're trying to respond to open-ended questions, and that's not how your design works. There's frustration because you're spending too much time alone and there's not enough connection. You are not honoring that sacral response. You are acting like a manifestor. You're initiating, you're taking charge, you're paving the way. And there's this inability to articulate, right? There's this inability to articulate, typically in a split definition or a triple split, right? Or a quad split. My son is a quad split, is a challenge. And then of course, if you're an emotional authority, you don't ride that emotional wave, right? So frustration can be very present in a generator's life, right? I always say frustration and overwhelm. I think those are the two biggest things that I see generators like you face. It's frustration and overwhelm, right? This is like, oh, I'm so frustrated. I'm so overwhelmed, right? And it's often because people don't really understand how to interact with generators, right? So I always joke that when I ask my son an open-ended question, my 5-year-old, and I'm like, what do you want for dinner? It's like a deer in the headlights, right? Versus if I'm like, do you want mac and cheese? And he's like, uh-huh. And that is so important to understand, right? So if you're a generator, you need to educate the people in your life on how to ask you questions so that you do not end up in the not self of frustration and overwhelm, right? Because it's really hard for generators to tune into that sacral response if there's open-ended questions. Not the same for an MG, but for you as a generator, that is incredibly hard, right? The other thing to understand here is that frustration comes from being in the not self, but it also comes from being in what is known as the plateau of frustration. Every single congruent to their design generator will get frustrated, even though they acted in response. Meaning, you followed your strategy and authority, and here you are, you're still frustrated. And this is often because you're here to go deep, right? And so this plateau of frustration happens. Think about it from the perspective of like mastering a sport, right? You don't just one day wake up and are a professional athlete, right? You over time develop the skills, and it's like, I'm still not getting better. 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 Whoa, I got a lot better. Right. And so this generator plateau of frustration happens in the same way because you are here to be a master of something, right? You're here to be a master of something that you love. And so we come to this generator plateau of frustration because it's a point to pivot or a point to dig deeper. Am I going to pivot? Am I going to dig deeper? Am I going to pivot? Am I going to dig deeper? And every generator who has honored their sacral response will hit this wall, They will hit this plateau of frustration, and it will happen over and over and over again throughout your career. And it's important to understand that that's like, okay, is it time for me to double down, or is it time for me to kind of shift directions? And remember, as a generator, you're methodical, right? You don't switch gears very quickly. You're not like an MG who can bounce from thing to thing to thing, right? You can shift quickly like a race car. That is not how the generator like you works. It's like, it's methodical. So it's going to have to be very deliberate in its pivoting, right? It's going to have a very potentially well thought out plan, right? So understanding that this plateau of frustration is not here because you're in the not self. It's here because you need to either double down or change what you're doing. And this happens to every generator. I've seen it over and over again. And it's like, okay, is it time to double down, or is it time to pivot? Is it time to do something a little bit different? Right. And it's important to understand that, because that dance is always going to happen for you as a generator. So then when we come to the aligned generator, these are people who trust their sacral response. They literally dance with the world around them. They have a very, very deep-seated understanding of who they are. And then they dig deeper on who they are. They are incredibly relational. Okay. They have connections with others on an incredibly intimate level. Okay. They want to work in collaboration. Generators don't necessarily like working alone. Of course, caveat, caveat, caveat. But generally speaking, generators want to work in collaboration, right? They want to connect with others. They want to be relational. That is how they are designed. We joke that my youngest son is a pack animal. He's a generator. And that my oldest son, a manifestor, is the leader of the pack. And so understand that dynamic, right? And so if you're in this place of frustration, it might be because you don't have the right people in your life, right? And an aligned, congruent to their design generator is the person who becomes the expert. They become the niched expert. Okay. So when we think about some action tips or affirmations for you as a generator, it's important to note that you are here to respond. You are not here to initiate. That gut response of can help guide you through your life. So trust that response. And if you're an adult and you're like, James, I just don't really I don't feel that sacral response. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the sacral, but it's important to understand, start small. Is my name X? See if there's a response, right? Ask yourself these questions, or get someone to ask you these questions so that you can start to tap into that sacral response. As a generator, you are a force to be reckoned with because of the energy you carry with you that literally resets to zero each and every day. You are meant to use up all of your energy daily. Use it. So if you're having trouble sleeping as a generator, it is because you have not used up all your sacral energy. So, and that doesn't mean that you need to necessarily work from the time you get up to the time you go to bed, right? That is a huge misconception. It's just about using that sacral energy up. That could be for play or for passion or for whatever, right? But that energy is meant to be used daily. My youngest will literally, you can see him kind of come out of body if everyone else in my house is ready for bed and he's not ready. You're like, how are you still bouncing around like this? That is that sacral energy. It's here to be used up each and every day. Conversely, if he spent a day outside running around all day, he'll be the first one to fall asleep because he used up all his energy. So understand that dichotomy that exists in you as a generator. As a generator, you have deep access to your inner knowing, and you can trust that inner knowing to guide you. So learn to establish trust with your gut. You must find work that you love and are passionate about. And this will be the driving force behind your happiness and joy in life. If you aren't doing work you love, you will become frustrated and your happiness will suffer. Once you have found work that brings you joy, if you find yourself frustrated, that can be a point for growth and deeper exploration, right? For generators, this is known as the plateau of frustration. You are here to be a guru, expert, or master. This can be a place for deeper exploration or a time when new opportunities appear. Do not wait when this frustration arrives, okay? Pause, and you will find opportunities to respond to. You do well when you set an intention and visualize the outcome and then wait for signs to show up in your reality. Then you take action because you're responding to the signs that show up. This pause to respond before taking action is a huge part of the generator dance that you must embrace throughout your life. This pause allows you to take a moment to then respond. And you are deliberate and enjoy a methodical process. Switching gears doesn't come easy to you. Honor this. You are a powerful finisher and can be relied upon to bring projects and activities to life. So what does all of this mean for you and your business and your life? As a generator, responding is a way of life. Find someone who you trust that can ask you yes or no questions so that you can tap into that sacral response and get clarity on your path. Frustration is often a sign of digging deeper and a place where you need to explore more. Rather than giving up, which many generators do, they give up in this plateau of frustration and they move on to something else and they only end up circling back to it later on in life. So rather than giving up when you feel that frustration, when you've acted in alignment with your strategy and authority, this is a place to dig deeper. You may find yourself frustrated when you are waiting for something to respond to. That is normal. You spent most of your life behaving like a manifestor. This can feel unnatural and awkward. Learn to embrace this. This is how you operate. And then trust that sacral response because it's not going to steer you wrong, right? You are here to be an expert. When we think about marketing, social media is an amazing way for generators to have something to respond to, right? So for example, I always say to generators, post an ask me anything thread in your community. It will give you lots and lots and lots of things to respond to because so many generators are like, I don't know what to post, right? Say, ask me anything. And it will give you so many questions to create content from. When we think about business models, most business models can work well for a generator as long as they're doing work that they are passionate about. And then most importantly, as a generator, you need to surround yourself with people who believe in the work that you do. And you need to cultivate and nourish a team that is built around your responding. It's built around you. Okay. It's built around your response. Okay. And educating the people in your life. Like you need to ask me yes, no questions. I don't do well with open-ended questions. It's okay to say that. Actually, it's important for you. Right. And so understanding this as a generator will become really key for you to showing up, living in alignment, and being in that dance with your sacral response. Thank you so much for tuning in to the generator type. We will see you on the next one.